all of these things pose very serious risks to South Africans' economic freedoms, and I think would, if implemented, mean that South Africa will continue to slide down the EFW rankings.
Why is South Africa experiencing a decline in economic freedom? Well, joining me to discuss is my colleague at the Centre for Risk Analysis, Chris Hattingh. But before we jump into this video, just a quick reminder to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy our content. We release a new video every weekday morning. So, Chris, the Economic Freedom of the World Index is out. That's an annual publication delivered by the Fraser Institute in Canada. What is South Africa's economic freedom looking like at the moment? Why are we slipping down those rankings?
Thanks very much, David. Well, people's experiences on the ground are downstream from the policies and ideas implemented by politicians and bureaucrats, and those policies and regulations are in turn adopted within the framework that those politicians adopt in terms of ideology. So if people are experiencing lower quality of life outcomes, that means that the policies and regulations implemented upon them are done from the point of view of a bigger state, a centralized state, higher taxes, more regulations, etc. So the Fraser Institute uses data from sources such as the World Bank, the IMF, various reserve banks and central banks around the world, and some other sources to measure countries' economic freedom across 5 categories. These categories are size of government, legal system and property rights, sound money, the freedom to trade internationally, and finally regulation. And the Institute measures 165 jurisdictions on the Economic Freedom Index. South Africa, in the latest edition, based on 2020 data, comes in ranked 99th. So again, that's 99th out of 165 jurisdictions. In the year 2000, we were ranked 47th. So you can see the steady decline over the last 20 years. And I think that reflects a government that has implemented more and more policies and regulations that have inhibited and undermined South Africans' economic freedoms in various ways. And that means that South Africans' quality of life has, on average, declined.
And what are we talking about when we refer to economic freedom? I know that there are those different subcategories, Chris. How do we define this concept of economic freedom, and why does it matter?
So it can boil down to the very basic idea of people's freedom to engage in voluntary economic transactions between each other, that freedom to trade with the person that you encounter on the street, to choose which shops you spend your money at, where you want to invest, where you want to save your money, who you want to trade with across borders, or even with someone in the community or the city very close to you. All of that helps to define economic freedom. It means your ability, your dignity, your sense of action to make economic decisions for yourself. Shouldn't just be focused on, for example, the stock exchange or those big decisions made by the biggest corporates. It's very much about the man on the street and his or her freedom to use his or her wealth in daily transactions to make sure that they try and improve their lives and to try to uplift themselves and their families. When you have less economic freedom, you have less scope of action in your life. You have an overbearing bureaucratic state which tries to tax you in various different ways. A lot of that might be couched in noble rhetoric, and it's done, quote unquote, for your own good to try and fund various government programs. But government funding has to come from somewhere, and the bigger a state is, the more revenue it needs, and that in turn means it's going to try and tax citizens more. It's going to try and regulate economic activity more. And that in turn also disincentivizes people's individual economic activities. So there's less incentive to take risks. And I think that in turn means a society's overall quality of life declines over time.
All right. Well, the economic freedom fighters, they are supposedly fighting for economic freedom in our lifetime. That's their slogan. But I once heard it said that economic freedom fighters fight for economic freedom like firefighters fight fire. They're actually against economic freedom. But let's focus on South Africa. We're sliding down the rankings. So in the year 2000, South Africa was 52nd. We're now at 99th. What do you think accounts for this slippage in terms of South Africa's economic freedom?
I think the biggest focus is on South Africans' property rights and the various attempts to dilute those. You can also look at regulations and legislation along BE lines, so the government trying to dictate to business how it should conduct itself in terms of who should be employed and who should not be, all the various forests of bureaucracy through which small and medium businesses need to navigate when they want to start up or when they want to grow, when they want to invest. The general difficulty with moving one's goods around the country when you try and trade because of a lack of port and rail capabilities. All of that has steadily impacted on South Africans' ability to use their economic freedoms to improve their own lives. And I think you see that evidenced also in terms of people leaving the country, maybe for places where it's easier for them to engage in economic activity. When you make it more difficult for people to invest capital in a country, you shouldn't be surprised when they leave, when they try and find places where they get better returns on those investments, on those risks that they take. And then just looking forward a bit, we've got things such as the expropriation bill, the land court bill on the table. We've got repeated notes of prescribed assets. You've got plans such as national health insurance and the basic income grant. All of these things pose very serious risks to South Africans' economic freedoms. And I think would, if implemented, mean that South Africa will continue to slide down the EFW rankings.
So, Chris, what does South Africa need to do to achieve economic freedom in our lifetime?
At base, it requires a fundamental realignment or complete change. Actually, I shouldn't say realignment, but a complete change in terms of understanding the role that the state should play. At the moment, it's a very centralized view. It's a view that the state can create jobs, the state can create investment. When you have that point of view, you have various state departments trying to extend their control over as much of the economy and life as is possible. So we need change both in terms of ideology, but then also in terms of the policies and regulations that are implemented. We also need to, I think, reconsider the view that the best way for people to make a living, to make progress in their lives, is by being reliant on government grants, because again, that means the state is going to want to collect more and more tax revenue going forward. So if you change some of those viewpoints, those ideological touch points, in turn, you will see better regulations, more individualism, more wealth creation focused regulations and policies coming out. Of course, the ideal would be a complete abandonment of things such as expropriation without compensation, but I don't think we'll see that anytime soon if we don't change the ideology that is present in government at the moment.
And ideology is quite a sticky thing. It's unlikely that we're going to see a fundamental reorientation of the ideological direction of the ANC. So what does that leave? The prospects for reform are ever remote. And we at the CRA have long argued that only a broader coalition of opposition parties could deliver that, perhaps some kind of exogenous variable as well. How likely do you see that in the foreseeable future?
I think we might see some reforms in the sense that the ruling party is forced into a very difficult position because of the consequences of its policies up until this point. So you'll see reforms maybe around electricity or spectrum or that kind of thing, simply because that is the harsh reality at the moment. But it won't be done wholesale. It also won't be done without many caveats that will probably undermine those reforms in the first place. In terms of coalitions and the possibility thereof, I think that is quite strong in 2024. I also hope that those coalition parties will look at, number one, the data provided by something like the EFW, but more importantly, the ideology underpinning that data and why it's so important to understand the relationship between the state and the individual and business in the right way, because then you'll formulate the right kind of policies. If you don't get that relationship right, then you can have all the data in front of you, but you'll always think that the state should be in control.
Chris Hattingh, thank you very much. Let's hand over to you, our audience. Why do you think economic freedom is on the decline in South Africa? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.